We begin 3 lines from the bottom of Samach Daled Amud Beis, Tanan. This goes back to the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek. It's discussing the 2 Seirim on Yom Kippur. What happens if one of them dies, or if there's a problem and you have to replace them. So you have to make the Geidel over again. You can't just replace that one that died. You have to bring 2 over again and make the Geidel over again. So now it comes out that you have 1 extra one. So what do you do with that 1 extra one? So it says that you let it die. Right? That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanakama says that you can't let it die because it's a chatas hatzibur, and chatas hatzibur, you just let it go out and graze, and then it gets a mum, and then the money is brought as an adova. But there was a machlokes here, and this is what the Gemara is continuing with, between Rav and Rabbi Yechanan. Which one do we consider to be the extra one? Right? So Rabbi Yechanan says that from the first pair, that's the one that's considered to be extra. Because once the first pair became possible to be used, once its pair died, so now it's not used again, and therefore that's the one that's left to graze. Rav said, no, the first one you can be makriv. It's the second one that you will makdish, and from the second pair, that's the one that's left to graze. So now the Gemara is going to ask a question on Rav's opinion from the Mishnah. So Tanan, it said in the Mishnah, She'ein chatos tzibur meisa. That over here, when you have this chatos, which was la Hashem, that's the one of the seirim that's la Hashem is a carbon chatos. Right? So if it's not going to be used, what do you do with it? You have to let it graze, not to die. Why? Because it's a chatos tzibur, and a chatos tzibur doesn't die. So this next piece of Gemara here is based on the concept, it's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that we had a few times, that by a carbon chatos, if the owner had already his carbon brought from another carbon, so then this chatos that's not going to be used, what happens to it? It became pasul, or it's not being used. What happens to it? You have to leave it to die. Usually by karbanis, a carbon that's not used, what happens with it? So you let it to get a mum, and then you use the money for another carbon. But not by a chatas. By a chatas, there's halacha l'Moshe Misinai that you have to let it die. But on that, the Tanakama came and said, that's only by a chatos of an individual, not by a chatos of a tzibur. By a chatos of a tzibur, you have to let it get a mum and so on. So the Gemara now is medayik. So what does this mean? The Mishnah here is telling you that this is only by a chatos of a tzibur. Ha de yachid, if it would be a chatos of a yachid of an individual, kahai gavna, in a similar case like what it says in the Mishnah, mesa, the halacha would be that you leave the chatos to die. In a similar case, like what it says in the Mishnah. This is the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that a chatos that's not being used is just left to die. Now, what is a similar case to what it says in our Mishnah? So the Gemara doesn't bring it, but Rashi here brings the case of a Gemara in Tamura, just like over here you have in our Mishnah, where you have basically the pair of the 2 seirim, and now you have to be makdish a second pair. And I have basically 2 chatois. You have from the first pair, you have from the second pair, and you have to figure out which one you're going to be using. So in the Gemara in Tamura, Benegeta Yochid, there's a similar case, a classic case, where a person was makdish a carbon for his chatos, and then that carbon chatos got lost. And now he's bringing a second carbon chatos to replace it. And then what happened? His original carbon chatos was found. So, over there in the Gemara and Tamura, there's a machlokes about this. What happens? So, Rebbe says that whichever one you end up bringing from these 2 karbanis, you now have 2 that you were makdish. The first one that got lost, and the second one. So, Rebbe says whichever one you're going to end up bringing, so the other one is left to die. That's the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that the other one is left to die. Right? Chatos, that of a yachid is left to die. Chachamim say, not necessarily. Chachamim say it depends. Not necessarily do you leave the second one to die in such a kind of a case. Usually when you have a carbon chatos that can't be brought, so yeah, it's left to die. But over here, Chachamim say, no, not necessarily. So now the Gemara is going to explain in what case are Chachamim arguing. So that case that I just mentioned, when you have 2 karbanis chatas, because the person was makdish one and the other one got lost, and then you found it, so now you have 2. It's similar to our case over here. So the Gemara brings Bishleim el Rabbi Yechanan. So what it says in our Mishnah, and the diak that we said over here, the diak that we said that in a case that's similar to this, by a yachid, the halacha would be that it would be left to die. This could be understood based on what Rab Abba Amarav said. What did Rab Abba Amarav say? So again, this machlokes that I just mentioned between Rebbe and the Chachamim in the Gemara and Tamura, when you had these two chatois, and one of them got lost, and then you found it. So now Rebbe says that the one that you're not bringing is going to be left to die. Chachamim say not necessarily. So what did Rab Abba Amarav say? So Rab Abba Amarav, Hakoil Moedim, everybody will agree in that case, She'im Niskaper B'She'ena Avuda, if which one did he end up using as a carbon? The one that never got lost, the second one that he was makdish. So then Avuda Mesa. That one that got lost, that's the one that you're not going to be using. In other words, the first one that got lost, and then you're not using it, that's the one that's going to die. That's the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Everybody agrees in that case. In what case were the Chachamim arguing? What happens if it happened in the reverse? That he had the first one, I got lost, and now he has a second one. And then when he finds the first one that got lost, he brings the one that got lost as a carbon. The second one that never got lost, he doesn't end up using that as a carbon. In that case, the Chachamim say that you don't leave it to die. Why? Because the halacha l'Moshe Misinai that you leave a chatas to die if it's not being used is if it got lost. The one that got lost and you couldn't use it because it wasn't here, that's the one that if the owner was makriv, the second one, I say that the one that got lost, it has to be left to die. But if you found that one that got lost and you ended up using that one that got lost, and now the second one that you were makdish, it was never lost, and you're not going to be using it, that's not left to die. That's not included in the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Only the one that got lost is the one that's included in the halacha l'Moshe Misinai that it has to be left to die. Okay, so what's the Gemara saying? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, in our case, what are we doing over here? Which is the one that he's being makriv by these? So let's go back now to the two seirim over here. Which one is he using as the carbon, and which one is he leaving to graze and not using? So according to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, the new one that you are makdish now, the second soir, is the one that you're using for the carbon. The old one, the first one that became puzzle, that's the one that you're leaving to graze. So therefore the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we understand why in that case, the first one, which is the one that became puzzle, if it would have been of a yachid, everybody would agree that that has to be left to die. Because that's the klal, that is the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. The one that got lost, if that's the one that you're not being makriv, because it's the one that got lost, everybody agrees that that's the one that's left to die. Same thing over here by the sa'ir. If it's the first one that you're not being makriv, you're being makriv the new one, so the first one, everybody agrees that that's the one that became puzzle, that's the one that became pushed off, and therefore that has to be left to die. If it would be from a yachid. Only by a tzibur we say that it's not mesa. Huh? True, but getting lost and becoming puzzle are equivalent. It's either getting lost and therefore you can't bring it and therefore it's left to die, or it became puzzle because its partner died and therefore couldn't be used. The point is, if the one that became puzzle, or it wasn't here, it was lost, and that's the one that you're not being makriv, that's the one that the halacha l'Moshe Misinai applies to, that it has to be left to die. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it makes sense. But Elul Rav, according to Rav, you do the opposite. What do you do according to Rav? The Gemara doesn't spell it out again, but we had before. Rav said that it's the first one that became puzzle, which is the one that you're going to be makriv. It's the second one that was never puzzle, the second sa'ir, the second peer of the sirim that you're being makdish. So the second one is the one that you're going to leave to graze and not use. Right? So according to Rav, so the Gemara now jumps straight into another point, but Rashi explains that the Gemara here, it doesn't spell out a point. Now according to Rav, the second sa'ir was never puzzle. The second sa'ir that you were makdish was never puzzle. So just like we said before, that according to the Chachamim, what do the Chachamim say? When you had two chatois, one got lost, one did not get lost. If you were makriv, the one that got lost, and then the one that did not get lost, you were not makriv, that one, since it never got lost, that's not part of the halacha l'Moshe Misinai that it has to be left to die. It never got lost. So if so, over here, according to Rav, if it's the first one that you're being makriv as a carbon, and it's the second soir that never got lost, that you're not being makriv as a carbon, how could you say that in such a case, if it would be by a yachid, it would be left to die? The second one never became puzzle. The second one is perfect. So in such a case, the halacha l'Moshe Misinai should not apply. That's number one. Rashi says on that, if you look in the second line of Rashi, Loi mi boya. The Gemara doesn't even, this is obvious that it doesn't fit according to the Chachamim. Besides that, the Gemara says now another point. That really, let's look again at these two examples that we're speaking about. They're not really compared to each other. We're speaking about the example of the two Se'irim, Yom Kippur, and then the example of a person that was makdish one Karban Chatos, and his Karban Chatos got lost, and then he was makdish a replacement. So the Gemara now is going to explain it's not exactly the same. Why? Because by the case of the Chatos, you had one, and you only bring the replacement when the first one got lost. You don't have the two ever together in the beginning. You had one and then the other one got lost. That's why you will makdish another one. Over here though, by our case, what happens? He has the first one, and the first one was always there. Nothing happened to the first one. The only reason you couldn't be makdish of the first one is because its partner died, or something happened to the other one. Right? But this one is always here, the first sawyer. And now you're bringing a second sawyer as well. So you have two that are basically coming together. If you remember before what Rav said in the Gemara, this is a fundamental point also for this Gemara. Rav's opinion is, Baalei Chayim einon nidachin. Live animals never get rejected, even if it was possible for a certain period of time that it couldn't be brought. But once later you have its partner, now it could be brought, Baalei Chayim are not pushed off. So really in our case, when the person has the first sa'ir, and now he has the second sa'ir, he has a choice between the two of them, which one it could be makdish, or makriv that is. So if so, the Gemara says, what would really be the example to compare to our case? Not the example of where he was makdish one chatas and the other one got lost, but another case. Elo l'Rav, but according to Rav, havale kemafrish shtei chatois lachrayis. Our case of the two se'idim will be compared to a person that right from the beginning is being makdish two chatois lachrayis. Why is a person being makdish two karbanis for one chatas lachrayis? Because he wants to take responsibility that if anything is going to happen, I should have a replacement. So he has two. He has an option to use two of them. That's the case that's compared to our case. Because over here you have the exact same thing. Right? When he's makdish the second sa'ir, so what happens is, now he has a choice. He can either use the first one or he can use the second one. They're both the same. Because the Baalei Chayim einam nidachin, the first one does not get pushed off. So therefore he has a choice which one he wants to be makriv. What's the halacha when you have two chatois and you have an option which one to use? A person that designated two karbonos for karban chatas because he wants to take responsibility if one gets lost. So then, miskaper b'achas mem, you use only one of them, of course. Vashniya, what do you do with the second one? You don't leave it to die. Tira, it grazes, and if it gets a mum, then you bring it the money of it for a carbon. In other words, in such a case, when you will achatchila makdish too, the halacha l'moshe misinai, that the one that you're not using is left to die, does not apply here. Because in this case, right from the beginning, you were makdish two, and you had a choice which one you were going to use, and you used one and not the other. Over here, the second one does not have to die. The same thing over here, this sa'ir was always there. The first sa'ir was always there. Elamai, technically, there was a while where you couldn't use it, but it never really got pushed off. Baalei Chayim einam nidachin. So you have an option of two to use. So if so, in such a case, why are we saying that if this story would have happened to a yachid, the halacha would have been that it would have been left to die? According to Rav's opinion, there's no reason to leave it to die. You have a choice which one to use. Answers the Gemara, Kiv and Rava, since Rava explained before. So what's the reason? According to Rav, if Baalei Chayim einam nidachin, if the first sa'ir never really gets pushed off and you have a choice which one to use, so why does Rav say that you use the first one as the carbon and the second one you leave to graze? So Rav explained before that Rav's opinion is that Sava like Rabbi Yosi, that he holds like Rabbi Yosi, the Amma mitzvah b'rishain, that it's a mitzvah to use the first one. So therefore, meikare kemafresh le'ibodami. If so, it comes out that the second sa'ir that you were mafresh, when you had to make the geidel over again, you're being mafresh, that second one, Lashem, right from the beginning with the intention that it's not going to be used. Because you know it's a mitzvah to use the first one. So therefore the second one is you're being makdish it in a way that from the first moment it's possible. It's ibud, it's not possible, but it's not going to be used. So therefore it's not compared to the case of a person being makdish two chatois together because he wants to take responsibility if one gets lost and therefore he could use one or another. No, over here since it's a mitzvah berishain, the second sar that he was makdish, is something that was never intended to be used, and therefore, in such a case, if it would have been a chattas of a yachid, that should have been left to die, because that's the klal. By every karma chattas that's not being used, it's going li'ibud, has to be left to die. That's the pshat according to Rebbe, according to Rav, that is. Okay, the Gemara continues now with another part of the Mishnah to try to prove Rav and Rabbi Yechanan's opinion. Which one do you use, the first one or from the second group? So Tanan, we learned, what did it say in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda Aime Thomas. Rabbi Yehuda argued with the Tanakama. So the Tanakama says when you have that extra one, so what do you do with it? You have to leave it to graze, not to die. In other words, the halach l'maishu misinai is only by a yachid, not by a tzibur. But Rabbi Yehuda says no, even by a tzibur, this karm chatas that's not being used is left to die. So now, which one exactly is left to die? So before we continue reading the Gemara inside, just as an introduction, in order to understand the Gemara, you have to remember that the Gemara said, in the Gemara that we learned yesterday, the Gemara said that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and this everybody agrees to, the Gemara said, even Rabbi Yechanan agrees to this. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, Balei Chayim Einon Midachim. Live animals, even if it couldn't be used for a certain period, is not pushed off. It could always be used. And the Gemara proved that from the Lashon of the Mishnah. And Balei Chayim, did I just say Einon Midachim? Nidachim I meant to say. Balei Chayim Nidachim. Balei Chayim get pushed off. Okay, and the Gemara proved it from this that Rabbi Yehuda clearly says, if the blood from the carbon Lashem spills, the Sayra Mishtaleach that's alive, still alive, cannot be used anymore. So even though it's still alive, it gets pushed off. That's what the basis of here, what the continuation of the Gemara is based on. So now, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? That Thomas, that the extra one that's not going to be used has to be left to die. So the Gemara asks, Bish Laimel Rabbi Yechanan, according to Rabbi Yechanan, this is going to work out. The Amar, what did Rabbi Yechanan say? Sheni shebezug rishon, the extra one of the first pair, yireh, that's the one that you're not going to bring as a carbon. That's the one that's left to graze. So therefore, what do you do according to Rabbi Yechanan? Le Rabbi Yehuda yamos. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, so the extra one from the first pair is going to be left to die. And meskaper b'sheni shebezug sheni. So then, which one do you bring as the carbon? The second one from the second pair that you brought. So that makes sense. But now if you think about this according to Rav, it's going to come out that you can't use not the first one from the first pair and not the second one from the second pair either. Why? The Oma, what did Rav say? That Sheni Shebezuk Sheni Yira. It's the one from the second pair that's left to graze. So let Rabbi Yehuda Yomos. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, the second one from the second pair is the one that's left to die. So now, let Rabbi Yehuda b'may mechaper. According to Rabbi Yehuda, which one could you use as a carbon? Why can't you use anything? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't use the one from the first pair either. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds, Balei Chayim Nidachim. The first one from the first pair, once it was pushed off, it can't be used again. So you can't use the one from the first pair and you can't use the one from the second pair. So which one are you using? So the Gemara answers, and Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the Tanakama on this point. The Gemara said this already before. Mi Savres, Rabbi Yehuda, Asheni Shebezuk Sheni Koi, do you think that Rabbi Yehuda agrees to the Tanakama? That the Tanakama said that it's the second one, the leftover one from the second pair, which is the one that's left to graze. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that. Rabbi Yehuda, Asheni Shebezuk Rishon Koi. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the one that's considered to be the extra one is from the first pair. That's the one that's left to die. Rabbi Yehuda argues on this point as well. The Gemara explained this yesterday, but if you look into the Lashon of the Mishnah, it says, Va'oidam Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on 2 points. The first point he's arguing on, the Tanakama says, the chatos that's pasul, the chatos that's not being used, it has to get a mum. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it has to be left to die. That's the first machlokes. The second machlokes is, which one? The Tanakama, according to Rav, says that the one that's left to graze is the second one, because Balei Chayim Einon Midachim. And Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, it's the first one that has to die, because it gets pushed off. So he's arguing on that point as well. Now the Gemara brings back a point that it said yesterday in the Gemara. The Gemara brings the exact same point, but it just says in a little bit of a different way. The Ikke, the Kamoisev Hachi, there were those that asked the question on Rabbi Yechanan from the Mishnah as follows. Yesterday the Gemara brought the exact same point, but it started off asking this as a question on Rav, and now it brings it as a question on Rabbi Yechanan. Again, this is based on the Mishnah and the point that I just said, that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing in the Mishnah on the Tanakama in 2 points. That's what's mashma the Mishnah. It says Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, and then it says V'oidam Rabbi Yehuda. So now, the Gemara says, there are those that ask as follows. It said in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said an additional point, Nishpach Adam, the blood from the Chatas Lashem spilled. Yomis HaMishtaleach. So then the carbon that was, not the carbon, the soil that's supposed to go to the Azazel, it has to die. The Meis HaMishtaleach, if the one that was supposed to go to the Azazel died, Yishafach Adam. So you have to spill the blood. So the point of Rabbi Yehuda is that these two are dependent on one another. So according to Rav, we understand what the va'id is. There's an additional point that Rav Yehuda is arguing here. What are the 2 points he's arguing about? Reisha, the first point of Rav Yehuda was pligi b'chatas sibur. They're arguing about a chatas sibur. Do I apply the halacha l'moshe misinai that a chatas that's not being used has to be left to die only by a chatas yachid or even by a chatas sibur? Tanakama says it's not applied by a chatas sibur, and Rav Yehuda says it is. That's the first argument. The Seifa, when it says va'oidam Rav Yehuda, what's the second point that Rav Yehuda is arguing about? Pligi b'bali chayim. What they're arguing about is when you have an animal that's still alive and it became puzzle, does it get pushed off completely or not? The Tanakama, according to Rav's opinion, says it does not get pushed off, and Rav Yehuda says it does get pushed off, and therefore it has to be left to die. So we understand there's 2 arguments here. Elul Rabbi Yechanan, but according to Rabbi Yechanan, my va'oid. Why is Rabbi Yehuda using the term va'oid? Even the Tanakama also agrees, Bali chayim nidachan. Rabbi Yechanan says that even according to the Tanakama, the first one is the one that's left to graze, and not the second one, because the first one gets pushed off. So in that Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama agree. So why does he say va'oid? The Tanakama agrees to this point. Kashya. So this is a question according to Rabbi Yechanan. The Gemara yesterday we learned said that Rabbi Yechanan Taka agrees to this point. Rabbi Yechanan agrees that in the Mishnah, Rav's pshat is right. And Rabbi Yechanan though has a source from a Braisa. That's what the Gemara said yesterday. Here the Gemara says Kashya. Okay, now the Gemara will explain this statement of Rabbi Yehuda itself. So Rabbi Yehuda basically was saying that these 2 se'irim are bound with one another. If anything goes wrong with one, the other one can't be used. If the blood spills from the carbon lashem, the sar lazazel can't be used. If the sar lazazel dies, then the one lashem can't be used. So the Gemara asks on this, I understand if the blood spilled. So now you didn't finish what you're supposed to do here. So yomis amishtaleyach. So therefore, the one that's sent off to the azazel has to die. That katilei savid mitzvase, because the mitzvah was not completed yet. Right? So the zrika of the dam is an integral part of the avodah, which must be done. And Rashi here brings what we learned before in the Gemara. It says in the pasuk chukah that if you're doing this avodah with the big day lavan, this is something that must be done. And if it's not going to be done, you're going to have to start over again from the geidel, because even the geidel itself has to be done in this way, because that's part of the chukah. It's done with the big day lavan. So that way you understand. The blood spilled, you're still in middle. Elo, however, the reverse case where it said, Meis HaMishtaleach, the Sar Lazazel died. So now, Amay Yishafach Adam. Why are we saying that the blood of the carbon Lashem has to be spilled and you have to start over again? Why do you have to start over again? And here the Gemara says, Amay thing. Has Avdud Le Mitzvase. Once you designated this Sar Lazazel, the mitzvah is done. The rest of what has to happen is not ma'akiv, is not a must. Why not? Because as Rashi just mentioned, the source of the fact that anything is ma'akiv is from the word chukah. Chukah means that it must be done this way. What's the story by the Sar Lazazel? The Sar Lazazel, the only part of the Sar Lazazel which must be done is the actual geidel. The actual geidel is what the Kayan does in his big day lavan inside the Azara. Regarding that, the Torah says the word chukah, that he's doing it here with his big day lavan, that it must be done. What else has to be done with this Sar Lazazel? What do they do afterwards? The Kayan have to be mizvad on it, the vidui. And then after the vidui, they sent it off to the Azazel and they pushed it down the Azazel. The vidui and the fact that it had to be taken to the Azazel are not ma'akiv. If you don't do it, the mitzvah is done. B'di'evet, if it's not done, that's what Rashi here brings. If it's not done, the geidel that was done, that's ma'akiv. The rest is not ma'akiv. So if the blood spills and this Sar Lazazel dies, why do you have to start all over again? The geidel, which is the only part of this that has to be done, was done already. So therefore the Gemara brings a pasuk. No, Amri debei Rav Yanai. So they said in the yeshiva of Rav Yanai, Omakra. A pasuk says, Yomat Chai Lefnei Hashem, that the Sar Lazazel should be stood there alive in front of Hashem, lechaper, for the kapara. What is this referring to? What kapara? The kapara usually refers to a carbon, but this is not a carbon. So what does it mean? Ad masa yehei zakok liyos chai. Until when does the Sar Lazazel have to remain alive? Until after you complete giving the blood of the one that's Lashem. So therefore, even though, yes, you're right, the vidui and it being sent off to the Azazel is not ma'akiv, but it has to remain alive until after the zrika of the dam. That's what this pasuk is saying. So if it died before the zrika of the dam was done, you have to start over again. You have to make the geidel again.
What about if they send the goat to Azazel and then the blood gets spilled?
So then it's good. Then they don't have to do it again, because they already did the zrika at that point. Tananosam. So now the Gemara sort of starts a new inyan. The Gemara first starts with the halachas of machzas hashekel, and then it connects it back over here to the karbanos and Yom Kippur. So it says in the Mishnah in Masechta Shkolim, Bnei Yair shesholchu es shekleim. People of a city sent with a shliach their shkolim to the Beis Hamikdash. V'nignevu, it got stolen on the way. Oisha avdu, or it got lost. Im nitruma truma, when they found out that this happened, so they already had separated the machzas hashekel from the chamber into the boxes that it goes into, that we learned before. They would take it into boxes. So when they already separated the money for the karbanis, so then what happens is, when they separate the money for the karbanis, it's going to be done for all those people that sent their shkolim, that it didn't even arrive to the Beis Hamikdash yet, because we're afraid that it gets lost on the way, and therefore we want to include those people in the karbanis tzibur. So therefore, when they separate money even for those people that already sent it on the way. So therefore, if it was already separated, so this person that lost, this shliach that lost it or it got stolen from him, who is he responsible for? Who is he answerable to? He's answerable to the Gizbar and the Beis HaMikdash that's already separated for him, for this money. So therefore, Nishban, Legizbarin, he swears to the Gizbar, to the Gabbai Tzedakah of the Beis HaMikdash, to say that he's a Shem Echinam, really, right? He wasn't paid for this, so he's a Shem Echinam. So he has to swear to say that it got stolen or it got lost, and therefore I'm not responsible. Vim lav, if it was not separated yet. So therefore, who's the loss for? The loss is for the people of the city, not for the Beis HaMikdash. Nishban l'bnei Yair, he has to swear for the people of the city. U'bnei Yair sheklan acherim tachteim, and then the people of the city are going to have to bring a second time machtas hashekel. It's their responsibility. It's not the shliach's fault. Now what happens? Nimtzu. What happens if the original machtas hashekel that was lost was found? Or the thieves came and returned it. So what? Now you have two machtas hashekel. Elu ve'elu shkolim heim. Both are going to be machzas shekel. You can't take off. Once you designate it for machzas shekel, now you have twice over here the machzas shekel. But and you can't even use it for the following year. You can't say, so now I have extra, I can use it for next year. No, it's both going to be for this year. Rabbi Yehuda says, you could use it for the following year. Now that you have two machzas shekels, leave it for next year. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the basis of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Amar Rav explains, Kasav Rabbi Yehuda holds, Chayvais shel shana zu, any obligations that you have for this year. And Rav here, he says Chayvais, meaning not only machzas hashekel, this includes even karbanis. If you have karbanis that have to be brought this year and it's leftovers, it could be used, Krevis l'shana haba could be used next year. So machzas hashekel from this year could be used for next year. Karbanis that are left over from this year could also be used for next year. So therefore he says that you can use it. On this, the Gemara asks, Eisvei Abaye, this is the following brayso. Par v'sor shel Yom Kippurim. So here we come back to Yom Kippur. So you have the par that the Kohen brings for himself, Kohen Gadol, and then they have the sword, which is Lashem, that's brought for Klal Yisrael of Yom Kippur. She'avdu, that got lost, v'hifresh acherim tachtein, and he brings others instead of them. And v'chein, similar seirei avodah zarah. The seirim that are brought for avodah zarah, this is a case where the whole tzibur served avodah zarah, when the bezin told them they could, and they bring a sa'ir for avodah zarah. She'avdu, it got lost, v'ifresh acherim tachteim, and you brought another one to replace them. And now what happened? The original ones were found. So you have now two, you have extra. So what do? Kulan yamusu, all the ones that got lost, and you found them now, and are not going to be used, you leave them to die. They can't be used next year. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon say, no, they're not left to die because this is a carbon sibur. Okay, a carbon sibur is never left to die if you're not using it. Yiru achi yistavu, leave it to get a mum, v'yamachru, and then you sell it, v'yiplu d'meim l'nedava, and then the money is used for nedava. Shein chatas sibur meisa. A chatas sibur is not left to die. This is the same machlokes we had before. Rabbi Yehuda says even a chatas sibur is left to die, and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon says not. But what's the Gemara's question? Rabbi Yehuda himself that said that the leftovers from one year could be used next year is saying here that now you have the leftovers of this pot and soy that was found, and you can't use it for next year. It has to be left to die. Why can't you use it next year? So the Gemara answers, Amalei, Karbonis Tzibur, Ka'amrit. You're speaking over here about Karbonis Tzibur that are left from one year to the other year. That can't be used next year. Shani Karbonis Tzibur are different. Kidrab Tavi, Amar Abayshiyah. Amar Tavi, Amar Abayshiyah. The Torah says regarding the Karbanis Tzibur, this is the oila that has to be brought in this Chaydish. It says oilas Chaydish b'chotshei l'chotshei ashana. So Rashi says there's a lot of extra words here. Chaydish b'chotshei l'chotshei. So what do we learn out from these extra words? Amra Torah, the Torah says Chadesh v'havali karbim mitruma chadasha. You have to renew and bring the Karbanis from the new truma of the new year, starting from Chaydish Nisan. As Rashi brings, we learn out the Gzeira Shaveh that it starts from Nisan, that you have to bring from the new Machtas HaShekel of the year. So you can't bring the Karbanis Tzibur from last year that was bought from the Machtas HaShekel of last year. So therefore, there's no question regarding Karbanis Tzibur. Could be the actual Machtas HaShekel itself could be used for next year, but B'nigeya to the Karbanis, the Torah says has to be a new Machtas HaShekel from the new year. So the Gemara asks in this answer, okay, that's a good answer regarding the soir, which is actually bought from the Machtas HaShekel. But the par, who's the one that the money for the par to buy this carbon of the par for the Kohen Gadol? That comes from the Kohen Gadol himself. Michael and Meimar, what are you going to say? Why this par? If you have an extra one now, why can't you use it for next year? Answers the Gemara, Gzeire par or soir. They made a gezeira that you shouldn't confuse one with another. If we're going to allow you to use the par for next year, you might think you can use the soir for next year as well. Because there's such a kind of gezeira, we're going to leave a carbon that's fit to be used, and it's going to be now left to die. The Gemara says that you can't say such a thing. If it's fit to be used, you can't leave a carbon to die. Besides this, this whole point that Rab Tevi Amar Rabbi Yoshia said that you're supposed to bring the carbon of the following year from the new Machtas HaShekel, that's not ma'akiv, that's a mitzvah. It should be done that way. But even if you didn't, it's okay. The karbanis that you start from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, mitzvah la'avi min ha'chodesh. The mitzvah is to bring it from the new Machtas HaShekel. But v'im hevi min ha'yashan, if you brought it from the previous year's Machtas HaShekel yatsa, you're going to be yaitze, the carbon is accepted. Mitzvah, you're missing a mitzvah. So if the whole concept of bringing from the new year is only a mitzvah l'chatchila and a napi d'yeved, now on that you're going to make a gzeira and say that for the par as well, that you're going to not allow to bring it next year because of a gzeira, that you might confuse and do the same thing with the soir. If the whole thing is just l'chatchila, not b'd'yeved, why would Chachamim make a gzeira like this? So the Gemara gives another answer. The Gemara is going to go through a few answers over here. We're not going to come to the conclusion today, but the Gemara tries another answer. Rab Zayda gives a different answer. You can't use the parva, the soir from this year for next year, because the soir you made the geidel this year, and you can't. The geidel has to be the geidel of that year. You can't use the one that the geidel was made from the previous year. So the Gemara asks, okay, so v'naisi v'nagdel. So bring it next year and make a new geidel. Make the geidel over again. Answers the Gemara, Gzeire shema yaimru ha-geidel kaveya mishana l'chaverta. Yeah, you could make it over again, but the Gzeire is people might make a mistake and think that you're using it and the geidel from the previous year established it already. So again, it's only a Gzeire. So on this the Gemara asks, so even if we're going to say that because of this Gzeira you can't use it, so that's regarding the soir. Par ma'yikil with the par there's no geidel. There's no Indian, there's no geidel. So why can't you use it? Answers the Gemara, Gzeira par or to soir. There's a Gzeira because of one that you shouldn't confuse it with the other. So again the Gemara asks the same question. Mishum Gzeira yamusu, just because of a Gzeira you're going to leave the par to die even though it could and should be brought next year. So the Gemara now brings a third answer. Amru Rabbana Kamei da Abaye, the Rabbana said in front of Abaye a different pshat. What they're afraid is because of a case of a chatas that the owner dies, and what does that refer to over here? What happens if the Kohen Gadol, which is the bailam of the par, and he died? You want to use it next year. The Kohen Gadol that brought this chatas the previous year, he designated the previous year, now died next year. So the Kohen Gadol is not here, and people are going to not realize and they're going to use it. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisa says a slightly different pshat. Taisa says if the Kohen Gadol himself actually dies, nobody will make a mistake to use his carbon chatas from last year. But this carbon chatas, the par that the Kohen brings, is mechaper also for all of the Kohenim. And therefore one of those Kohenim might die. And if one of those kainim might die, you also can't use it. And therefore, that's something that they might not realize from the hundreds or maybe thousands of kainim. So therefore, the gzeira was you shouldn't use it next year. So the Gemara says this is only with the par, which the kain gadol is the owner, or the kainim are the owners of this. Soir ma'ikalameima. What's with the soir? Why can't you use it next year? Gzeira soir otu par. So it's a gzeira that you shouldn't confuse the two. Frek the Gemara gzeira yamusu. Just because of gzeira you leave it to die. Hello, the Gemara gives another answer. Fourth answer. Gzeira, the gzeira here is mishum chatos she'ovra shnasa. The gzeira is because of a korban chatos, the age of the animal by korban chatos, it only could be a year old. If the animal is older than a year, it can't be brought as a korban. So therefore, if you're using it from 1 year to the next year, the gzeira is that you will come to use a korban chatos that's older than a year. So the Gemara right away asks, gzeira? Your answer is a good answer, but you're saying that this is only a gzeira? He gufa chatash avra shnasi. Why don't you answer and say that you can't use it for next year because it's going to be older than a year? It's not a gzeira. So the Gemara says, no, loy kashya. It's not a question. The reason why he said it's a gzeira is because the way we count the year is different. Kerebi, because he was following Rebbe's opinion. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa regarding how you count a year. This is talking about when you sell a house in Eretz Yisrael in a city that has a wall around it, and you get 1 year. The seller, that is, gets 1 year to redeem it. How do we count that one full year? So the Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Shona Tmima. Rebbe's opinion is that the full year you count shloish meis v'shishim v'chamisha yom k'miyim meisachama. You counted the year of the cycle of the sun. 365 days. That's how you count the year. Chachamim say no, you count 12 months. You don't count the year, you count exactly 12 months. And vim nisabra l'meicher. If there's 13 months, if it's a ibiyar, so then the meicher gets an extra month to be able to redeem the house in that city. So the point is, if we're following Rabbi's opinion, there is a possibility that you will makdish this sa'ir this year, and next year it's not going to be a year old yet, because you have to count a full year. It's added 11 days, 365 days. So maybe it's not going to be a year old yet. So, but there's a gzeira that you shouldn't do this, because in most cases it will end up being older than a year. So therefore we don't leave it for next year. So Gemara again asks, this is a good answer for the soir, that you're afraid that it'll be too old to use. Par ma'ikalamema. What's with a par? A par could be up to 3 years old. So what's with the par? Gzeira parat isar. There's a gzeira one for another. Frek the Gemara mishum gzeira yamos. Just because of a gzeira you leave it to die. Oid, another question. Chatos she'ovra shnasa. What's the halacha of a chatos that's too old to be brought as a korban? What do you do with it? L'raya azla. That's actually left to graze. You don't leave it to die. A korban chatas that's too old to be used, we treat it as if it's inside of a beis hakvaris, and the kain gadol or the kain can't go in and take it. And you leave it there to graze, but you don't kill it. So the question is, what did it say before? What did Rabbi Yehuda say? That these karbanos that can't be used, it's left to die. But if the issue is, if we're talking about a case that it's because it's going to be too old to be used, so then it shouldn't be left to die. It should be left to graze over there, like in a beis hakvaris. That's the example that the Shlokish uses. So therefore, this is not a good answer either. We'll see Mitzvah tomorrow, the final answer.